leadership. So let me just say up front, I think leadership is service. I think the things that make a good prime minister is recognizing that we're public servants. We haven't won some kind of lotto. We don't get to lord it over everybody. We're here as your employee, and we want to work. And I had a little quibble with our introduction tonight saying, who will get invited back? It's not to be invited to go to Parliament. It's to sign up to work and to be of public service. I believe in service leadership. That said, I find the things that Maxime Bernier has said to be completely appalling, and he knows that I feel that way about the things he says in the House. We used to sit together, and generally when he said anything, I'd have to put my head in my hands because it was so horrific.
I appreciate you, but, you know, I don't share your policies. I don't share your socialist policies because, you know, we won't be able to create any wealth with your policies. You have the same kind of policies than socialist countries like Venezuela. That won't create any wealth. Well, you must admit that.
No,
you will spend $60 billion.
Is the single biggest economic opportunity in a generation or more.
That's not responsible.
And supporting immigration is what we need for this economy.
And I'm supporting immigration.
I'm proud of the fact the European Greens are the only party that is pro-immigration. So are we.
Thank you, Ms. May. Now,
thank you, Susan, for the question. It's very important, and as Greens, cooperation is in our DNA. And I think we need to say to people, this is the most beautiful, blessed country on earth. And if you have wealth, you have obligation, you have responsibility. Pay your taxes.
Yes, for sure. I think
if you look in our budget, you won't see a line item called robot tax. It's not a proposal for imminent use. What it is that we need to get ahead of the discussion on automation and artificial intelligence. We're the only party that has it out there. Workers want to know. We're looking at this. If we're losing a worker and replacing that worker with a robot, shouldn't we collect the payroll taxes from the robot so we continue to have the revenue for people who are, at this point, maybe we have to imagine in the future a world without work. Well, what is our meaningful choice in life if it's not work? How do we support that? I'm not sure it's fair to say no other party is talking about automation.
In the world of AI, imagine for a moment that society has sufficient revenue from the work that's being done by robots instead of people. I mean, look, we're looking far down the road. What does it mean for societies if increasingly the jobs that we think of as absolutely permanent become impermanent?
Base point of it is that right now we're watching inequality rise already, and the chances that that could completely skyrocket and we could actually lose up to 50% of employment. So in order to take care of everyone, we need to make sure that that revenue that gets increased in large corporations comes back to the people. So we're going to be looking at every single method of doing that, and the robot tax will kind of be the beginning.
Hello, Yellowknife. Good to see you again. Look, we must act for income equality. We need to look at the fact that over the years, the gap between the various wealthiest Canadians and the average Canadian is continuing to expand. We're calling for a tax commission. We haven't had a proper tax commission since the 1960s to examine our tax code, to see if it's still progressive, to find out if all these corporate boutique tax cuts that have piled up over one after the other after successive governments is taking money away from those Canadians who need it most and allowing those who really have massive income to continue, as many Auditor Generals have found, to be treated by Canadian Revenue Agency as if they have special status and don't have to pay their taxes.
Ms. May, thank you. Mr. Blanchet.
Canadians use Airbnbs.
That's right.
Canadians use all these things you're talking about.
They also use our hotels, which are regulated and have to employ people. And there are some things that are distortions in the marketplace because the virtual e-commerce economy is not without its costs to people who've been regulated. So the Ubers hurt the registered and regulated taxi industry. The Airbnbs undermine the hotels and Airbnb and regular B&Bs. So you look at that package. Your local bookstore suffers when we order from Amazon. Yeah. It gets delivered to our door, not to keep the money in our local economy by shopping local. So that's just one example. But in terms of housing, we have to look at the models that work, and we have to bring back the funding through the federal government into the housing market, not just for social housing, where housing is a right, but also in the affordability crisis for people in the marketplace. What's in front of us is a disruptive change that could mean that a lot of Canadians don't ever actually have a job. We're in a society where the revenue streams come from automation and AI. There's tremendous potential for good, obviously, in automation and AI. We need to make sure that we analyze it in advance and that we think around this key piece of revenue. The industry has shed jobs. They have driverless trucks now. They have done a lot to stay, because bitumen production is a loser. We're concerned as Greens that we work together, that we not alienate Alberta.
I noticed that you had a strong sensibility for Alberta since your previous positions on oil were quite nice to them.
No, they're not.
However,
we're
in a
shutting
family,
down the oil
sometimes-
sands by
in a
2030. They don't find it
sometimes-
nice.
in a family,
That's why they
sometimes-
deserve
In a
fairness.
family, sometimes.
We're the only party that expresses concern when workers are laid off because the large, big oil companies have been laying off thousands of workers from automation to improve their profits. So it's the conundrum here is to stay profitable. The oil sector in the oil sands has been shedding jobs for years because they need to automate because their business is a loser. We want to make sure those workers have confidence that they are not going to be left high and dry, that they can make their mortgage payments.
In other words, we measure the success of our country by the well-being of the people and not by the GDP.
So right now, the Green Party, with our progressive policies for social justice, to get rid of tuition, to get rid of the existing student debt, to bring in pharmacare, to bring in dental for low-income Canadians, all of that we have costed, and we found the money to pay for it, and at the same time, to make sure that our economy moves out of the fossil fuel era and into the new economic revolution of green energy and clean technology. In our platform, we call for taxes on the e-commerce companies, the virtuals, the Amazons and the Googles and the Facebook that mine billions of dollars out of this country and pay virtually no tax. We agree with you. We have to cut all fossil fuel subsidies. As a matter of fact, that was a promise made by Mr. Harper in 2009, by Mr. Trudeau in 2015, but they've increased because we're subsidizing LNG, which I'd like to hear you answer where you are on JNL Quebec. We need to get rid of fossil fuels, and right now we're still giving public funds.
I was
to
the minister
pipelines.
responsible for the back.
I'm going to move you on.
And so that strategy starts with very strong principles of full engagement of the workers, full engagement of the specific communities that are going to be impacted, so that those strategies make sense for the workers. Things like bridging pensions. If you're almost at your retirement, you're not going to want to upskill and find yourself a different job. For those who want to keep working, this sector is full of people with skills, and those skills are transferable.
Yes, 100%. So by free education, we mean free education, reskilling, upskilling, and training programs for absolutely everyone, for everything covered. And that's really where the revenue needs to go, and where we intend it to go is to use the benefits from the automation to provide for the people who could be having to suffer from it, possibly.
Yeah. On a just transition strategy specifically for workers in the coal sector. And it was co-chaired by an environmentalist from New Brunswick named Lois Corbett and by Hassan Youssef, from the president of the Canadian Labour Congress. They asked for $400 million for that part of the sector for transition. That's also in our budget. It's not designed to be the exact equivalent to the sugary drinks tax. It's just how it worked out when PBO crunched the numbers. But we need to see, what are your plans? Share with Canadians. Mr. Singh, we have not seen a full budget from the NDP. We know some of their promises. They were the first to go forward with their platform, full marks for that. But how do you pay for it? We're the only party in this election that has been forthcoming. Our full platform is available online. Our full budget is available online, and more than that, our risk analysis of where our projections might be too modest or too large, that's available. Anyone can read our full documentation. And I'm very proud of the fact that, yes, we are ambitious. The workers in the fossil fuel sector are highly skilled workers. Their skills are easily transferable. I mentioned the deep oil wells in Alberta, 100,000 abandoned, 40,000 abandoned wells in BC, by the way, another, I don't know how many thousand in Saskatchewan. The workers who drilled those wells are ideally trained to work on geothermal from those wells. The workers who lay pipe have exactly the same skill sets we need to put up windmills. These are not hard transitions to make. The challenge of Mission Possible is to find enough and train up enough young people to take the jobs in electricians and plumbing and carpentry that we will need to retrofit all the buildings.
Who else wants to jump in?
But in terms of arts and culture, Netflix is outside of our normal Canadian content rules of the CRTC. This has to change. It's too large a risk to the Canadian culture, and even more a risk
to the culture of Quebecois, the culture of Quebec needs to be protected from content that streams into our homes online that has nothing to do with Canada. So yes, there have been some Canadian programming that's been very successful, but we need to be able to ensure that our culture survives, Quebec culture survives, la francophonie and the culture of Francophone Canada is able to compete with online giants that take billions in profits out of our country, and yet they don't pay taxes.
That too, Max.
Yeah,
it may be the only thing on which we agree, that no corporation is above the law, and we need an inquiry.
I get asked pretty often what we're going to do if kind of almost all the jobs are erased, and my answer to that is always look at the world and is it what we want it to be, and is it good enough? We in no way are spending the time we should taking care of each other, enjoying this amazing planet that we get to live on, and there's just so much, and I think that it is not for us to decide what any one person wants to do and enjoys doing. So it should be up to every individual to actually be able to do that and not have to worry about their own survival.
Places where there is revenue, offshore money that's being hidden, a financial transaction tax, going after 1% tax on people who have more than $20 million in wealth, and a series of moves to increase the revenue coming into the government of Canada. Now, that is all, of course, based on the current economic situation. If we hit a recession, we would not slavishly or ideologically balance the books. But right now, we think we'll have a balanced budget in 5 years.
Mr. Blanchette, your opportunity to debate Ms. May on this topic.
It is really a bad idea to borrow to live.
I wanted to use the example that right now in Denmark, where they have a lot of wind energy, they have so much wind energy that they have excess, surplus, they sell it to Norway. These are two separate countries with water in between, to be obvious, but they have better interties than Quebec and New Brunswick. And Denmark is able to sell its excess wind energy to Norway, and Norway uses that electricity to pump water up into the reservoir for what's called pumped storage. When the wind isn't blowing in Denmark, Norway opens the sluices and has hydropower. It controls pumped storage. It's a perfect synergy of renewable energy between different countries. So we should surely be able to do it in Canada. And that makes it impossible for me to do anything other than to keep saying, Justin, Andrew, Jagmeet, read the science. Let's work together. We've only got this one chance.
So are you saying, though, the bus or the train more affordable as well? We're going to help fight climate change by bringing in the green home renovation tax credit, which will put money in the pockets of Canadians and help lower emissions. And we're going to pay for that. I'll just finish.
It'll cause them to go through the roof.
The way we're going to pay for those is by cutting corporate welfare and reducing Canada's foreign aid budget by 25%. So we're going to stop sending money to the relatively well-off countries. We're going to bring that money back home so that Canadians can get ahead.
Mr. Scheer, that may be the worst idea in your whole non-platform, is the cutting of foreign aid. I wear this little pin. This is the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, to which this country is committed. Ending poverty within the next decade, within Canada and globally, is actually possible, but not if we ever had the misfortune of having your
I believe we should take that money and bring it back home so that Canadians
greedy and
can get
selfish
ahead.
policies.
It's not greedy to put money in the pockets of Canadians, Ms. May.
We're
I fundamentally disagree with you.
We're going to stop you there.
It destabilizes the world, what you're proposing.
We're going to stop you there.
Mr. Scheer, where is your platform? Let's see the budget, Mr. Trudeau.
To avoid catastrophic levels of global warming, we must double our current target. We must listen to science. We must not build the Trans Mountain Pipeline. It's not the last, because it gets canceled if we're serious. You can't negotiate with physics. You can't as Prime Minister, you can't as leader of the Liberal Party. There's a carbon budget. It doesn't budge. And that's why it's so heartbreaking for me to look at you today and know you could have done so much more the last 4 years. Please, God, you don't get a majority this time around, because you don't keep your promises.
From the Rockies to the Bay of Fundy, Conservative premiers have gotten elected on promises to do nothing on climate change, and we need a strong federal government to fight them, to make sure that we are moving forward on protecting the future generations from the impacts of climate change, Ms. May.
But your goal is a target for failure. When you hang on to Harper's target of 30% by 2030,
We
you
are going to pass
predestining
that
us.
target, Ms.
Well,
May.
you better get to double that target, or you never get to carbon neutrality by 2050.
Time is up, Ms.
This is
May.
part of
Time
the
is up, Ms.
budget.
May. Mr. Blanchet, you can talk to Mr.
Mr.
Trudeau.
Trudeau, you claim to have
We've published all of them. We're the only party right now that has produced a full budget, a full platform, and has opened it to public scrutiny. Is to make sure that we can pay for all our promises, but we're quite convinced we can, which brings me to a place where we have savings. And that is, even though every government in Canada, starting with, this may surprise you, Stephen Harper in 2009 pledged to end subsidies to fossil fuels. In 2015, Justin Trudeau was elected on a platform that included a pledge to end fossil fuel subsidies. Instead, they expanded them. They expanded them by the billions. So we will end fossil fuel subsidies in the first year in government. It's easy to do. And I do want to underscore again Amita's point. Banning fully autonomous weapons is something that Canada has refused to do so far. So where on a lot of these issues we can say, well, the government of Canada has been proactive in funding AI and has been talking about what we might need to do in the future. They've actually, at this point, the Liberals have rejected taking action with other countries at the United Nations, recognizing that as the campaign is called Ban the Killer Robots. That's a campaign from the same group that worked so hard to ban landmines. Mines Action Canada with the tagline, if people want to Google it, Ban Killer Robots, is about this very important issue of banning fully autonomous weapons because they pose a very different kind of threat to peace and security. Canadian sovereignty is at risk when we drop our own interests. Right now, our northern coastline is inadequately protected. We need to have more surveillance on water and in the air. For instance, the F-35 is not in Canada's interest except for the alliances with NATO. Look at the current situation in terms of where is the real threat of an action by a foreign power to take over Canada. It's less likely to be bombardment from the air. It's more likely to be working through cybersecurity threats, turning off all the subways and all the water treatment plants all at once. We're in a new era, and conventional warfare is conventionally deployed. Is, I think, likely an anachronism. We're looking at autonomous weapons. We're looking at the threat of, which is something we're very concerned about in terms of the workplace and the life of work of Canadians. What's the impact of artificial intelligence? We're also looking at what's the impact of autonomous artificial intelligence in terms of military application. We need to actually be what we've been in the past. We punch above our weight globally. We need to identify the real threats that are coming at us, not the ones we see in our rearview mirror.
You have the same kind of policies than socialist countries like Venezuela that won't create any wealth.
Well,
you must admit that.
No,
you will
the
spend
climate
$60
crisis
billion.
is the single
That's your
biggest
promises.
economic opportunity
$60 billion
in a generation or more.
That's, look at your platform, Elizabeth, and you will spend $60 billion. Spending won't create any wealth. You cannot spend your way to prosperity. We need to have more private sector investment.
Yeah.
And at the end, you know that our national credit card is full. We still have deficit. And Mr. Trudeau just had $70 billion on our debt, and you'll have another $60 billion on our debt. It is not responsible. Our children will have to pay for that.
But you have your famous private sector having got massive tax cuts when you were in Mr. Harper's cabinet, based on being told these were the job creators and it would be great when they got tax cuts. They have not invested in the economy. They're sitting on piles of cash. Mark Carney calls it the dead money. We need to get that money and do public sector infrastructure investments like a national grid that will bring renewable energy from one part of the country to the other. No pipelines, by the way, but we need an electricity grid that serves the needs of every province and every Canadian.